Hey everyone, welcome back to a video response. This is to the nostalgic video going around. I watched Blue Tonic's video on it, Alex. His was a response to the originators. Now I'm not sure about their channel, but I did watch it and I have the link, so I'll put his and their video in the description below so you can check those out. This is 10 questions regarding nostalgia, childhood, things like that. The first one is, what decades were you a kid during, and do you think they were better than current day? I'm not sure when childhood officially ends. I guess that's what, early to mid teens, something like that. So it'd be 80s to early to mid 90s. And do you think they were better than current day? For me, I do. And that's largely to the rise of technology and social media. I had to switch schools about 3 times as a kid due to switching addresses. And then there was a kid that failed 5th grade like 4 times at the second school. And he was just a bully to everyone. And I think he punched my brother in the face or something. So my brother was a really small guy. And when he complained, the teachers got mad at him for complaining because what turns out to be is one of my dad's old high school friends was a teacher at the same school. And he told my dad that basically they were trying to shove this kid out and he couldn't get into any trouble. They were just going to basically push him through the system. And when my brother complained, and then my dad complained, it started a process where it looked like he was going to be held back again. I'm not sure why there wasn't some sort of outer school he could be sent to for troubled kids or whatever. But yeah, so they got mad at my brother, and so my dad got so irritated he ended up having a big shouting match with the school board and just took us out and sent us to a religious school, which sucked incredibly. We weren't very religious. I had no idea what was going on. I remember for art class, we sat down and we had to make rosaries, and I'm used to doodling birds or whatever, and the lady's getting mad at me because my rosary is not making any sense. I'm seeing people tie knots with yarn, so I'm just knotting it up like crazy. And she comes over and asks what decade I'm in. I don't even know what a decade is. I'm going, the first? And you have this huge string of yarn I've made knots straight down. And she's like, what are you doing? And yelling at me in front of everyone. So that was not good. But here's the thing. That came and went. When you first go to a school and you have these embarrassing moments where you don't know anyone and people kind of razz you a little because you're the new person, that tends to fade out as the year goes on, your first year, and you meet people that are like you and you become friends. Well, now with everything being recorded and shared, every embarrassing moment I had during that initial getting to know people phase at each school would be recorded for posterity and would carry over and would hound me and dog me. Back then, no one at one school knew anyone from the other. So by the time I got to the Catholic school, no one knew anyone from the first two. Those are both public schools scattered throughout the city, and so everything was fine. After that initial super awkward phase of having no idea what they're talking about, whenever we're constantly kneeling and standing for prayers and stuff, and I'm just completely in school uniforms, which back then public schools didn't have uniforms like they do now, and so the whole thing, I'm wearing a button up. Never wore button ups. It was just, I didn't like the experience at all. But I eventually met my best friend, who I'm still friends with there. Of course, who knows if that would have worked out, because during that initial time, the first year there, when I'm learning the ropes, someone could have recorded me doing something stupid, and maybe he didn't want to be friends with the guy that's the butt of every joke. I don't know. But that just makes me really paranoid, the idea of being recorded and that being posted on the internet and you having no control over that whole narrative, because it's out of context. It's everyone does things that are stupid, but normally that's not there forever for everyone to mock. So I think in that context, I definitely prefer when I grew up. Also, I was around when the internet, obviously the internet had been around for a while, but when it was coming into common use, I should say, like my town was one of the first ones to get broadband in the late 90s. And I couldn't believe it. That same guy I told you about, my best friend back then, said, if you go there and you ask them for something called a cable modem, they'll give it to you for free to test. And sure enough, they did. And I couldn't believe the speeds back then. But before that, I had dial-up. Before that, I had AOL. And I actually got the excitement behind the internet. Now it's so blasé. People just, it's an everyday, it's a utility. You don't really think about it, you don't care. But I remember being absolutely fascinated by then. It just seemed like magic, where I could email someone and say, Japan or China or Spain to talk about video games, and they could get back to me, and I'd hear that little ding for a new email, and every single time it felt like a little present because that would never have came into my mind that I could have communication that fast. I remember me and the same guy were going through AOL's video game forum, and people were posting images of games before the magazines posted them, and we couldn't believe we were seeing the first images of something called Mortal Kombat Trilogy. We had never heard of it. No magazines had talked about it. I was seeing import screenshots of the first PlayStation or PC games that I couldn't run on my old system. I was seeing like 10-second quick time clips of people running. So that whole thing just seemed like magic. It was amazing. I was enthralled by it. So was he. And there's people I've talked to since that were in that era that were just captivated by what the internet offered. Especially when you lived in a smaller town like me and you didn't have access to a lot of the stuff where I had to drive over an hour just to buy certain PC games or video games, because back then all we had were a few Walmarts and a Kmart, and they just didn't carry it. To have suddenly all this in your home whenever you want it, like I didn't know what anime was until I was looking at, I think, a video game forum, and people used to have long signatures in their thing, or like a Usenet group, and someone put like their interests were anime. So, what's anime? My friend didn't know. Well, let's look, and that's back when Yahoo added everything by hand into their database, and they had a Japanese animation section. And then it's like, oh well, this looks pretty neat. And when you're an early, like preteen to early teen, that style of animation, you had ran across it, you had recognized it once or twice throughout, just from stuff being on TV, but you didn't know it was an actual genre, or so I certainly didn't in my small town. So that the whole world opened up for all sorts of things. So yeah. I appreciated the change when it came, but I'm so grateful I was a kid before it came, during that awkward period. Number two, what were your favorite toys as a kid? Oh, I think like everyone else, Transformers, GoBots, He-Man. I enjoyed Mask. Um, I did not have a lot of money growing up, and so my parents would they would give me nice things for special events like birthdays and Christmas, but for like, say you got a good report card, they would go to Kmart. My dad would buy the most generic toys you could find. Like I remember one was a slice of pizza with muscular arms and a machine gun. I don't know what brand that was. I don't know. I just know my dad saw it in his head. He was like, "Oh, here we go, a machine gun, and it's a piece of pizza. The kid's gonna love it." And yeah, I did. I actually would put it next to the handful of Transformers and GI Joes that I had. So yeah, I mean, I loved G.I. Joe so much, I would take the pack and I would cut when you would flip it over, there were little pictures of all the other figures so you could see, what all they had out there. I would cut those out and use those as stand-ins until I could actually get the figure, or if a neighborhood friend had the figure over. So those were my main go-to, and I'd always swap between the three. Like I'd be really into Transformers for a while, and all I wanted was Transformers. Then I'd be really into GoBots. The only downside was the really nice Transformers were too expensive for me to have, so I never had like the Starscream or the Optimus Prime growing up. But a friend down the street, his mom bought him like the first Optimus Prime, and it was a sight to behold. It was huge, it was hefty, and I always had these smaller, cheaper ones, like the sidekick characters to the main ones. So we get together and have these massive battles outside. So yeah, those are my favorite toys. Even younger, I know I had one of those caterpillars that lit up. I'm not sure what they were called, but they were plastic, and I think if you squeezed them, they lit up. I think as a kid, I was into that. And I also had this long stuffed dog, and inside was a cassette player. And I don't think it was anything special in that, like, you squeeze it. I think you actually had to unzip the belly and press play. But I remember, like, as I went on, it got weirder because the player started to break, and instead of saying ABC or whatever, it'd go as the tape would warp. So I remember I really liking that, and then towards the end, kind of going, put that in the closet. It's haunted. But yeah, I'd say a kid in the 80s most. Ninja Turtles came out right when I was kind of getting out of toys, but I still enjoyed them. And towards like the very end of the phase, I was really into comic books for several years. So I would get the comic toys, not really to play with them, but I mean, now people are kind of starved. They're not starved. They have an abundance of comic stuff. As a kid, I was starved for it. You didn't have anything comic. We had one comic store in town and just a few drugstores that carried comics. But I loved comics, and getting those toys was just another connection to it. So I'd get those, and in retrospect, I don't think they're very good because I don't have them anymore. But as a kid, I would pose them and leave them on the shelf. And if anyone came over and messed with them, I was like, "What the hell are you doing? Don't touch Iceman." But yeah, those are definitely my favorite ones. Favorite TV shows as a kid, mostly cartoons: GI Joe, Transformer, Mask, Centurions. When we come to my grandmother's house or go there, she would put it on USA, and they would have these old like Space Ghost. There was one. It was a family that traveled, and they had this weird rhinoceros creature that shot pellets out of a horn. I remember watching that a lot. The Smurfs. I didn't like the Smurfs, but it seemed to always be on USA when we go over, and so as a kid, you watch any cartoon. So of course we sat through that, even though it drove us nuts. When I was really young, I thought Care Bears, not Care Bears, what are the other, Gummy Bears. The idea of drinking something and bouncing always fascinated me, and I always thought their juice looked really good as a kid. Like I just thought, man, if I could get a hold of that. What else? In terms of live action stuff, I think we watch like family sitcoms like Family Ties. I watch A-Team, Knight Rider. I remember Swamp Thing. USA would play the movie or the series Swamp Thing a lot, and watching that. So I think, yeah, just the usual stuff. And nothing real regional. Like it was just whatever was big everywhere else. Top 3 favorite childhood movies. I really liked the Transformers movie. It freaked me out as a kid. I was devastated, but I loved it. I really liked the movie Cobra. I don't know. It's not a childhood. It's not like a kid's movie, but I saw it in my childhood. One of my best friends in the neighborhood was older than me. He was like, "You got to watch this movie Cobra. It's got Rocky in it." I'm going, I kind of knew who Rocky was. My dad liked the movie, and I was like, "What's Rocky doing?" He's like, "Rocky's shooting people." Rocky doesn't shoot people. Well, he is in this movie. As a kid, I couldn't separate the characters, and because he described it to me that way the whole time I'm watching Cobra, I'm like, when's he gonna box? This is weird. But yeah, I ended up watching Cobra a ton. It's a Sylvester Stallone movie where he's always got a match in his mouth, and he just blows the crap out of everything. My parents used to let us watch live action stuff like our movies. I remember they had this conversation with us once, like, "Do you know this is fake?" And we go, "Yeah, the Predator doesn't exist." They're like, "Yeah, there's no ninjas around here." Okay, great. Well, watch whatever you want. Just don't do stupid shit. So, it would probably be like more PG-13 R movies, but in terms of purely kids stuff, yeah, it'd be Transformers, Fly of the Navigator. I thought that was a really cool movie, where they kind of put a spaceship together. My brother loved E.T., but I always found it kind of weird. I love Temple of Doom. I don't know if that's considered a kid's movie. No, I'm sure it's not. But for growing up in the 80s, I'm sure every kid loved it. Like in Star Wars and stuff, which I did like as well. I'm trying to think of a purely kids movie, though. I didn't really watch Disney stuff. Oh, Sword and Stone. I thought that was a pretty fun one. So I'll go with that. I'd watch that if it came on. Tell us about a birthday party experience. We had this skating rink in town, and it was my first year at the Catholic school. So my parents would go, "You know what? Let's invite all your classmates." And I'm like, "This is a terrible idea. Please don't do this." And they're like, "No, it's fine. You'll see." And of course, I'm starting to like comic books like Calvin and Hobbes, and which I still like. Incidentally, you get more out of that the older you get. And none of the other guys were into that. At my other schools, they loved the same stuff. Everyone loved video games, cartoons, comics. At this school, all they did was play soccer. Like, it was weird to me. I didn't know anyone that played soccer growing up. I mean, you'd kick a ball or whatever, but you weren't playing soccer by any rules. This school, they played nothing but soccer. They didn't play basketball or football. It was soccer. And I have no idea how that started. But they loved soccer, and they loved clothes, like name brand clothes. I had none of those. I remember for picture day, I had to borrow my brother's clothes because he would get nicer stuff. And all my shirts were garbage. It was just like, those cheap T-shirts with like a character on it. And my parents are like, don't wear that. Get a button up from your brother. So yeah, so I had this party at a skating rink. My parents were like, "Oh, invite everyone." Well, a good number of people ended up coming. So I was like, "Oh, this is pretty good." Everyone, and when you went there, you got free cupcakes and stuff. And my parents made everyone goodie bags, and they had a good time. Except this one guy was walking up, and he didn't have a present. And he had gotten an invitation, and his cousin was there, and they were classmates of mine. So I was like, hey, where you come to the party? Where's the gift? He's like, I'm not coming to your party. Man, it was stinging. I was like, shit. All right, well, fuck you then. Well, then what he ends up doing is he goes and skates a little bit by himself, and then loops right back on and sits with the rest of the party and gets a goodie bag and stuff. And my mom's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have one for you. I didn't get a card back from you saying you were coming." And so people at the table are like, "Oh, he can have my thing of this." He's like, "Okay, thanks." He's eating cupcakes and he's eating chips. And I'm like, did we not see him just in the front? Me and him, he's being a dick. Like, don't let him sit there. But my mom's got to be nice. So I remember that, which isn't. It was my parents doing something really nice, and it actually worked out fairly well for me being new and no one knowing me. But then he came and kind of and crapped on it. I remember you forever. I'm not gonna say his name, but he tried to add me on Facebook a while back. I'm like, what are you doing? We never got along. Don't do that. Anyway, that's me being petty. Favorite board game and video game as a kid. I loved this board game where you put a marble in a volcano and you played a little adventurer. Now this came out at the height of like Indiana Jones. And my dad would play this with us too. I think my mom would as well. But me and my brother loved it. And they had little bridges and stuff. And it was a molded field or board. So the marble, when the lava would launch, a red marble would come out and it would go down one of these paths. And if your character was on one of the bridges, it would knock the bridge out and your character would fall into the lava, right? I loved that game growing up. That was a blast. My dad found it in the attic a few years back and kept it. It's a ball. We also played. I love matching games. We had this one where it was these goofy monsters. And, you can play that by yourself, and I'd play it all the time. I love trying to, where you mix the cards up, you look at them, flip them over, and then you try to match three. I love that one. I don't think there was a really specific name to it. It had some probably monster match or something, but it was just the match three with a monster theme. Clue, I played Clue a few times and really enjoyed it, but that seemed a little higher level the younger I was. As I got older, you kind of get it, and my grandparents would play it with me. But I guess that game where you're the adventurer and the lava is marble. Video game, I really liked. I had a handful of NES games. And my dad had an Atari before he gave it to a neighbor of ours. As for the Atari, I remember liking Pole Position and Joust. Those are the ones I could easily understand. I liked those a lot. And I liked Mario and Duck Hunt. I had that for the Nintendo. I loved Gunsmoke. But to me, I think it would probably be The Legend of Zelda because my friend got it and I didn't. And so I would only play it at his house. And so I just had these, I would stay there for entire weekends because he was just down the street. But because I didn't have access to it, it seemed extra special. So, and I would never see the full run through of it as a kid. I'd only see where he was. And he tells me after you beat it, you can go back through and things are slightly different. He's burning bushes. And I'm like, how do you know how to burn that bush? And of course, he's just reading Nintendo Power, but he's telling me, I just know. I know all these. He's telling me these far-fetched secrets that don't exist. And I'm going, oh, this sounds incredible. See, I think Zelda, it had such a mystique to me. Like when the dungeon would get dark, and as a little kid, that was kind of scary when the music changed. Castlevania 2 freaked me out as a kid when the night it would turn into nighttime. That transition with the creepier music and the faster monsters. So I would say probably Legend of Zelda, even though I didn't own it, and that's probably why it held that extra mystery to me. Of the ones I owned, I probably played Gunsmoke the most. I thought that was a lot of fun. I liked Castlevania 2, but my brother was... all he played were Castlevania and Mega Man games, and I couldn't take him after a while. Tell us about a childhood holiday or vacation you fondly remember. Well, this one was one. Okay, so when I get into something, I get into it, like really into it, and then I move on to something else. But I'll bounce back between things I like. Like say if I'm reading a book about Byzantium or like the late antiquity, I'll read like 5 of those in a row, and then I might go to a book about the Peloponnesian War. I'll read 3 or 4 of those in a row, and then I'll get into science fiction movies, and I'll watch. I'll spend 2 weeks doing nothing but watching that. My mom's similar, but growing up, she got into. I guess she read the books Little House on the Prairie as a kid, and then they had that show that aired when she was still pretty young. But then they brought it back when I was young, like I think TNT or TBS. I think it used to be TNT. It was one of the two. Started airing it, and she got really into it. And so, not necessarily fondly remembering this vacation, but it's the most memorable because she tells me and my brother we're going to drive to Canada. So as kids, we're like, oh, well, okay, that's penis. That seems pretty neat. And we're at the very, I mean, Florida's the only place lower than us, like the very bottom of Florida. We are right by the Gulf of Mexico. So that's a long trip. And of course, they buy some comics and they buy a new cassette for my brother. They bought me like a Wizard comic price guide. I loved Wizard back then. And they bought a few comics for us each because at the time he was still kind of in the comics. And we're pumped, right? And she bought me my Calvin and Hobbes book. And I was so excited. I was ready for this vacation. Two things happened. One, in retrospect, they didn't give us that many things. Like they picked us up from school and we immediately left, right? We were pumped. We went through all of the comics, the Wizard and the cassette about 12 times over, and it had only been about an hour and a half. We weren't even halfway through the state. Now, from there to Louisiana was absolutely nothing but Little House on the Prairie stops. I had no idea Laura Ingalls had traveled to so many different places because it was a trip to Canada, but what we didn't know well into it is that it was my mother's vacation because she wanted to visit these spots. And we were so bored. It was mind numbing. Now I probably appreciate it more because, I mean, just as you get older, you like looking at nature more, seeing fields, things that are relaxing. As a kid, you don't want that. As a kid, you want like fun, is there water rides, is there roller coasters, miniature golf, video games, is there something, just let me do something. Instead, it was like, here's a log cabin she stayed in for a night. Okay. And then it was, here's a museum about the Pony Express. All right. And then here, and it was torture. And they also didn't really, I mean, they planned for it, but I guess not realizing how long it would take. And at the end, all we had to drink was Sunny Delight. And I can't drink Sunny Delight anymore. I didn't really like it then, but we were in the middle of nowhere. There's fields everywhere. The next town's not for like 4 hours, right? We're in nowhere. And it's just, I'm thirsty. Here's some Sunny Delight. Like, I'm telling you, I cannot drink any more of this crap. Like, you're getting nauseous just drinking it, but you're so thirsty. So yeah, a lot of lessons were learned on that trip. But it was just a string of trips or stops based on Little House. We go out of our way for like 5 hours to go see where she spent the night in a hotel twice or something. Or like where she mailed a letter once. And we were going, my mom would say, okay, if you see anything interesting along the way, let us know. I remember we passed by this thing and it had like live alligators. And my brother was like, oh, live alligators. Let's go see that. No. I said, okay. And then it's miniature golf. Ooh, let's go see it. No. Everything was no. But as she's saying no, hey, if you see anything interesting, let us know. We'll stop. Well, this looks interesting. No, it doesn't. We're driving. Like my dad would try. When we get to a hotel, he would take us out. If there was a lot of hotels had little arcades in the lobby or at least one or two machines, he'd give us some quarters, let us, run our legs, watch us while we swam, just something to get us out. Because I could tell he was doing all the driving. He didn't want to do this either. But it was like, this is something for your mom. We're going to do it. And so any chance we got to get some sort of like snack or comic or something at a Walmart or even just a gas station, it's like, please, 5 hours in a car looking at fields, reading the exact same issue of X-Men for the 30th time. I can't do it anymore. Yeah, that's definitely a vacation I remember. That was a long trip. And then we get to Canada. We go to a gas station. We drive about an hour in to look at this like mountain range, and then we drive right back and leave. I was like, what? This was a ruse. What are you doing? What was something you collected as a kid? Toys. When I was really young, nothing. But then as I got a little older, GoBots, He-Man, Transformers, Garbage Pail Kids. I was a big fan of Garbage Pail Kids. I remember my brother collected way more than me. He had this suitcase full of them, and I took him outside to show a friend. And we went off to play, and then it rained, and it ruined all of them. And he was so pissed. But yeah, Mad Balls. Those were a lot of fun. I love Mad Balls. These were like these monster balls that you could squeeze and throw. I also collected, as I got a little older, sports cards. That was a little phase, mainly because we had moved in that neighborhood. A kid that went to school with me lived like 2 houses down. He was in sports real big, but at the time, like basketball was really fun to watch. Like Michael Jordan was playing, Shaquille O'Neal has just started playing, Jason Kidd had just started playing. Sean Kemp was doing really good. He was not that old in the league. And like Hakeem Olajuwon was to play. So all these people that, the games are really exciting. So I kind of got into that for a while. And this is when like Fleer and Topps really started making like super fancy sports cards with I used to have the old baseball ones. Like if I go to an Astros game with my dad, he'd buy me a pack, and those are like those stiff cardboard. But these were glossy with like silver foil, and at one of every so many packs you'd have a hologram or something. So I really got into that, which transitioned to comic book cards. Me and my friend that I mentioned earlier hit that hard. I still have some outside in the shed I found in the attic. I collected as many as you could. I love those things. I have binders and binders of them, and I would actually just sit there and flip and read the backs over and over and just look at the art, especially when was it Topps or someone made these comic cards that came in these slip cases. Upper Deck, I think it was these really fancy like black and gold slip cases, and the lettering was like etched in gold, and the cards were painted by a handful of artists, and some of them looked almost lifelike. They were phenomenal, but they were really expensive a pack even back then. I'd work so many extra chores. I would do so many things just to get some. I remember, my friend was spending the night. We each got some packs. Oh, we traded. We looked, and then we're like, "What do we do now?" Man, I want some more. And we had a few bucks each, and I wouldn't bug my dad enough to where he took us back to get some more. And he's like, "I'm not going any more this weekend to anywhere else if you do this." And we're like, "That's fine." And we would just like hoard over them, and we had these doubles and triples, and we go trade them at the comic shop 2 for 1. I absolutely loved comic cards. Those were just a blast to collect. In comics, I had boxes and boxes and boxes of comics. I used to take really good care and be obsessed with them. After a while, I started like taping them in bags on the wall to make it look kind of like a comic store. Well, it looked like a comic store, but it was my favorite covers because I love the art to them. And so yeah, and I remember just one day not wanting comics anymore. It was a very weird thing. Went to a comic store, bought some, read them, loved them, and I set them down. I was like, okay, well, let me see what else is coming out. And as I was looking, even though it was like the next issue of that comic or whatever, I just wasn't interested. And I never bought another comic. I've always been worried that would happen with something else I like. It's like a switch flip. But yeah, comics were a huge thing. Great memories of those. And nowadays, my wife actually reads comics. I've tried to. I cannot get into them. I still like to look at the art because I have that's such a strong nostalgia hit when I look at the art, because I remember certain poses and artists like McFarlane's Spider-Man and the poses he draw are early Spawns or Jim Lee's X-Men. I'm just absolutely loving those. But she reads them now. She's reading Squirrel Girl or some such. I can't. I've tried to. I really want to because, I have such fond memories of them. Kind of hard to get into too. I was looking at them and there's like multiple timelines of X-Men and Spider-Man, and it was just, it's confusing. Do you still have any of the toys, games, or items you held dear as a child? Yeah, I have nearly every NES game. What happened to get my Super Nintendo? I pawned a bunch of NES and Game Boy games, which I don't know. My dad found funny for some reason I was doing it. Like he took me to this kind of dingy pawn shop, and he let me do it. I guess it was like a lesson, like if you want this, you got to get rid of something. But I did keep a handful of the major NES games I like. I still have Silverhawk, Gunsmoke, Mario Duck Hunt. I even have games that aren't great, but because I was really into comics, like I kept Captain America and the Avengers, I kept X-Men, even though those are not good, I still kept them. Castlevania 2, I still have that. Castlevania 3, Archon something. It's like a chess with like monsters. My uncle just gave it to us one day. I don't even know how he got it. He just showed up and was like, "Hey, you can have this." Just those, and yeah, I still have my childhood Sega Genesis. I'm looking at it right here. With I have the box in the closet. It still has a little bit of the Christmas wrapping paper on it, taped to it. I'm looking at the childhood Sega CD, which I couldn't stand as a kid, but I appreciate a bit more now that I'm older and I can buy some of the games that just weren't released in my town. I have my Super Nintendo I'm looking at here. That's also, I got the box to it. So a lot of the game stuff, a lot of the Genesis games like the Sonic 1 and 2 and Captain America and the Avengers I got with that Christmas. I still have those. The main stuff I got rid of were Game Boy games. I dumped pretty much my whole Game Boy collection. I wish I had kept Nemesis and Double Dragon. Those are the first 2 games I got. I loved them. I also liked Mercenary Force. But yeah, toys. I actually have a Grimlock still. That's the only Transformers I still have. He's on a shelf because I loved dinosaurs as a kid and he was awesome. I always wish I had the Stegosaurus, but I ended up with Grimlock. And I got him years after the fact. I think I got him at a swap meet or something. I got a Transformer, but it's like a little Jeep. I don't know his name, or a GoBot. He's a Jeep, it looks like, with a gold star. I don't know what it is. Even as a kid, I realized GoBots were kind of a third-rate knockoff, but I still loved him. I used to have the Gray Jet. I liked him a lot. I think he was the leader. Um, but I have a lot of the comics still. You know, I had them in a shed, and a mouse got and ripped a lot of them upside and tossed them. But I still have several boxes of them, several bags of the comic cards I have still in the binder sheets. I can't bring myself to get rid of those. But yeah, the toys, like I said, I have two. I think at the most. My mom kept some of the golden books as I loved as a kid, like Pokey Little Puppy. She has all those stored away. Um, do you ever take toys into? Oh, did you ever take toys into school for show and tell or end of term? If so, what? Every now and then, before school started, you would sit at the cafeteria table with your friends and you would show what you got. But I remember I stopped after I took this wizard from He-Man. Is it Orko? I I loved him. I loved the character, and I actually got the toy. It's one of those times where like I really wanted the toy, and my parents got me the exact toy I wanted, and then some fucker stole it. I had it at the table, talking to my friends. We're all looking at our toys, and then bell rings. I stand up, walk away, and I'm like, oh, I forgot Orko. And I'm not more than 4 feet away. I turn around and he's gone. And I never brought another one after school after that. Oh, it pissed me off. But yeah, I would, you know, if we had a specific show and tell day, I would try not to bring any toy I really liked because of that. But yeah, before that, definitely, like every day we try to bring something and look at it, or like we'd swap for the day or something, bring it back the next day because we'd always sit at the same table in the cafeteria before school. That happened as I got older with video games too. People would bring games to swap. I remember one time I brought like Mortal Kombat in the cart with the box, the manual for the Genesis, and the guy just hands me the cart of Street Fighter. I was like, what the hell is this, man? Like 1 for 1. If I'm giving you everything, I want it back. But then I got really jealous because Street Fighter 2 was such a better port that when I had the next day, he just brings back Mortal Kombat and he's like, you can keep Street Fighter for another day. I don't want this anymore. And I was like, oh, it's a hard blow. Ended up getting that one, but sold it to get the Super Nintendo. But that's it. Thanks for listening. I didn't realize I talked for so long. I will link those videos below, and I'll talk to everyone later.